too.
Yay, okay, all right, Scott. I think one of the first questions that is likely on everyone's mind, and maybe they know this about you, but I think it's so, it's such a singular opportunity to hear from you directly about how we're here to spend some time talking about your visual art practice, and maybe if you can just kind of kick things off for us about sharing how you see what you do as a painter, a printmaker, how that relates to your music and your performance practice, and how, if at all, you distinguish between one process and the other. Once we sort out the mics.
Yeah, well,
Maybe you can just do the handheld.
If you're okay
that's
with
easier.
handheld, I'll just do
Yeah,
handheld,
that's
that's
fine,
fine.
of course.
Thank you, though. That's a broad question, and that's great. It gives me some freedom to say, I guess, whatever I want to say. Well, we had a phone conversation that we should have recorded and just sat up here and played for you all. Because it was amazing, and very, very instantly friendly, and we went deep really, really quickly, and it was wonderful. That was about 3 of the questions in one. You mentioned when we spoke that maybe a lot of people weren't aware that I painted or made visual art, and I kind of think that most of the people here, I'm suspecting that they probably were aware of that. However, maybe not. What Nora was responding to was the fact that there was, from about 2012 to 2019, a period where I really didn't show anything. And that leading up to the 2019 show that I had in North Carolina, which a lot of work was that you see here was on display there. There was a transformation that was happening. It was a reaffirmation that was happening within my commitment to create. Some of you, many of you, or a few of you know that I went to art school. That was something that I was intent on doing from an early age. I think I sensed that. My first language is shape and color, composition. It's not words. Reading is not something that comes naturally to me. It's not something that I really enjoyed to do as a child. It's something that came on later. So visually, that was my first language. Visual was my first language, if you will. But as my day job with my brother, as the late Martin Mull said, every painter has to have a day job. As my day job became larger and more demanding, it took over in the sense that it became what I do to make a living. The priority for me and my paying my bills and taking care of my family, which I also give to creatively, my everything, all the time. So between the 2012 and 2019 period, after 2012, I had shown something similar to this one-day exhibition. I had shown in an apartment complex where we had stuffed a lot of paintings in this apartment complex for 2 days. I spoke with people, and we sold art. And most of the art sold, and I felt I made a good chunk of change, but I felt pretty empty. And I thought to myself, well, wait, now that work that I thought was going to be like my opus, was like the thing that I was going to say visually in my life, is all gone, which it wasn't that, but it being dramatic like I can be. It was all gone. And I thought to myself, well, don't do that again. And so what I did intentionally was, I thought about the word incubate. I said, you're going to incubate, you're going to make work. You'll know when it's time to show again, but there'll be no compromise. Mm-hmm. So my next show was a museum show that was kind of a retrospect, which was really my first quote-unquote real show, professional show, but it was really a look back and a book and the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So that was weird.
Can you just go back to the point of not compromising? Because I think it's something that many artists of any discipline struggle with. Wanting to stay true to a vision or a purpose, and sometimes consciously knowing that there's a compromise happening, but oftentimes not. Can you just maybe flesh that part out a little bit?
Yeah, that's going to do it for the talk, probably. My relationship with compromise and what we would call like a constriction or the opposite of liberty has changed quite a bit, and it's transforming as we speak. It's nice to be able to say, I'm not going to compromise, I'm going to do whatever I want. But I'm pretty lost when I find myself in a position without some sort of guide, some sort of grid, some sort of obedience, some sort of discipline. So I can get into that, and then there's a lot of nuances and details to how I would describe my relationship with discipline and obedience and nuanced commitment. But at that point, because my day job was paying the bills in a satisfactory fashion, I could say that. Because I was making, before then, I made a handful of commission pieces for families, portraits and whatnot that were, I was pretty ashamed, I felt some shame about making these things. Looking back on them, they're probably very endearing and sweet, but formally they're not great, which is fine. That doesn't, they still were kind of great and right. But if you think about it, those compromises, what I was learning in those compromises was extremely liberating. Mm-hmm. So at that moment of 2012, what I was feeling was, I made good money. That should have been the thing that was like, oh, this was a success. It was a success, but it didn't feel much like a success because this effort was just going dissipating. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I didn't really show this like I wanted to and share this with people like I wanted to. So in that regard, the showing of something, the compromise was not, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do that again. So I didn't.
And what was it like for you during the subsequent 7 years where you weren't showing it publicly? I imagine close family, friends, maybe had access to your studio or what have you. But how did that fuel you, frustrate you during that 7-year period to prepare you for your big exhibition? Yeah.
Well, really practical, like for anybody that's, well, you're all creators, but for those of you who play in the world of conventional artists, artistry, would you say, or fine arts, some really practical things happened during this. So it was nice, at 2012, yes, during 2000, I said, okay, I'm going to the studio, that's where I'll be. Forget this idea of working for a show. For 3 years, I stayed in that space. Practically speaking, logistically speaking, my studio moved from a very large space to still a relatively large space, but a much smaller than it was. I went from a 1,500 square foot, like 23 feet. It was similar to this room, a little bit narrower. And I had scaffolding, and I would work large scale because I would look at it as the museum that the work would be in. So that was what pushed me to say, well, if this is the size of the space, is practically speaking, this is how big I'll work, because I want to expand the view of these people that I'm in to that scale. I moved to another studio, and I could still work that big, but I could only work that big at one piece at a time. Yeah. So as that shifted, I was reading the memoir from Eric Fischel. Because of my day job, Eric Fischel knew who I was. He had listened to our music, so I reached out to Eric. I didn't know that, but I reached out because I wanted to see how his studio was organized, as I was organizing my studio.
Okay, wait, pause. So Eric Fischel, for those who may not know, is one of the most esteemed figurative painters working today. Realist painters, painter of the figure, and there's a lot of both enigma as well as a lot of information to digest in his work. And so you didn't know that he was already a fan of yours, and you reached out to ask him some kind of practical questions about studio?
Yes.
Oh my God.
I think Eric thought I wanted to be his friend. But what I wanted to do was go into a studio and get as many secrets as I could. And then when we met and we sat like this in the studio, at his studio in 2015, I left with a book that he wrote in it. He gifted me a book, and it said, so very nice to meet you, instant soulmates, Eric. And it was true. It was like we started a conversation, so we became friends. Instant. So we were. He knew we were going to be friends.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. I really wanted to know, well, what does his tabouret look like? How is he? Does he keep the paintings off the ground?
Yeah.
Is he working on more than one? Like, I wanted to see how is he making these figures. When you ask Eric how he's making figures, he'll tell you he doesn't really know. Everything he starts is started differently, and I ask him business questions about art. He really doesn't know. He may be lying, but
He's been around a little
he's
while.
He's been around, but he's very good at remaining a student. He keeps himself a student of his discipline, a novice in a way, which is crazy to talk about Eric because he's so sophisticated and so wise. But anyway, during that meeting, in typical Eric fashion, it became a critique where he was looking at some of my work. We were talking about it, and he was kind of asking me this piece. He was saying, it was painted beautifully, but where's the background? And I told him, I said, well, I love Wayne Thiebaud, and I look at Wayne Thiebaud paintings, and like, he doesn't have a background. And he was telling me, like, okay, but you're not Wayne Thiebaud. Okay, fair enough. But so he's asking me a question that he knew I was asking myself, that I was avoiding.
Yeah.
And a response to that was in the exhibit today. You'll see some of these cutout pieces. They're small, but they're actually much bigger than I realized. They're plywood cutout, isolated figures, and that was a response to Eric's comment to me, which it was just what I had to do to sort of bring it back down to basics based on that.
So you basically removed the background.
I removed the background.
And just left the figure kind of isolated.
Yep.
Those works, and I think we'll start to see them fairly soon in the images behind us, but those works feel so sculptural. They're so three-dimensional, and because you've eliminated a background, we as viewers can kind of project our own kind of scenario for what these figures are doing. Was that deliberate, intentional?
I mean, absolutely not. That's nice. That's nice that that happened. For me, it was like, okay, well, screw him. I'll just not do backgrounds. And I'll show him that I can do back paintings. And of course, he had seen Alex Katz do the same thing, and many of his other contemporaries. So he's like, oh, he didn't say this, but he was very fair with me and sweet with me. But for me, what it was process and fundamental form back to basics, and that's the one shape. And then I moved from there because that only lasted for a second, where I was like, okay, this isn't enough for me. I want more.
And what it seemed like there was something in the comment that you shared about, there's no background here because, I really admire Wayne Thiebaud's paintings. For those who may not know, he's famous for painting those cakes in display cases, cakes and desserts and food. He's a Bay Area artist. In any case, but it sounds like what Eric Fischel was trying to say to you. You're not Wayne Thiebaud, you're you. So what is it that moves you to make the choices that you're making that are yours, that are defined by you and the parameters you're setting and the questions you're asking? And how did that so there was obviously the reaction, eliminated the that, but how do you carry that forward in works post that?
Okay, so this is like, that makes me think about a lot of something that I think about a great deal. It's my guess, and from what I understand, the more experienced artists, you'll see them simplify. You see that. And as a younger artist, I'm sure some young artists do that naturally. But to force that is sort of like forcing humility, or I'm a humble guy. I'm just a t-shirt and jeans kind of guy. I don't need all that other stuff. Little does somebody know that your jeans cost $560. Your socks cost $180 or whatever.
They're really comfortable.
They're very comfortable. They don't last long, but That's not all exactly accurate, but the point is I think what Eric was seeing was that maybe that's where you're going. You'll know when you're going, but it's not working formally here. And I think he saw something which I did not see. I would have fought him on this. I would have argued with him about this then. I think he saw that it was dishonest, like it wasn't sincere about really. It was a fear to face this page. Now I was working. This is like 10 feet. Like
they're huge.
They're big paintings.
Yeah.
So I'm working large, so it's asking a lot. And anytime you use multiple figures in a composition, you are approaching a scary problem in that world. It's not scary like life or death, but you can frame it that way.
Well, it's super daunting.
It's daunting.
Yeah.
It's daunting, and you go, what is this? You have the normal creator ideas, like you're like, is this going to be worth my time? What will I lose? And I think Eric was pushing on that with me. Metaphorically speaking, if I was going to simplify like these, even though like that painting, I love that painting. I love it. And it's not just because it's a little boy of mine. I love the painting. If I saw that from somebody else out there, I'm drawn to that, lighting-wise. But I think he knew I needed to go into those problems of what the design of the page is. And that sounds like a practical art student problem, but that's really not, because every day is a page. Every conversation is a page. Every wall that we lay brick on is a page. So we have these choices to make, like the lead into dual. So that's metaphorically speaking, I think, what he was pushing on.
And it also, I think, is about letting the process determine the final result. Something that we talked about earlier, and I think it's important to share here is, to what extent do you have this image in your head? I know sometimes you work from photographs, but to what extent do you know what the final painting is going to be, and you're working toward that, or are you letting the choices that you make with every application of the brush to canvas kind of shift things a bit, and how comfortable are you with those little shifts?
Mm-hmm. Well, that would sort of lead us into like fast forward to now, where painting like this or some that we're talking about in this period back, you could guess what it's going to look like. You could guess what it's going to feel like from what the source I'm working from. Sometimes it might be like a collage style source. Nowadays it can be digital. It's digital almost always for me. It's the easiest way to do it. But I organize what I'm going to do now to no end. Like I'll prepare, because to me the discipline of preparing for it allows the action, the practice of making the painting more like waking up, like breath. Like it's no more the paint stroke. Each one is life or death, but whether it's good or bad is no longer life or death. And because I kind of have it worked out, and whether it's good or bad, I have to be like you and I talked about. I'm feeling secure enough to fail in these moments. I don't always feel, I'm sure all of us, there's times we don't quite feel safe enough to fail, but I feel safe enough to fail in those spaces.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a really incredible place to be, because it allows you to stretch further, I imagine. But do you find that you are taking, because you've been able to become more comfortable with that risk, are you taking greater risks?
Sure, I think.
And how does that show up?
Yeah. The risks that I would take is how much time you're going to invest in something that is really underwhelming to, let's say, the art world. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just say, even if you detail or filter or funnel it down to one gallery or to one person, like, I could spend a lot of time, and it really likely is going to be underwhelming, unimpressive, clumsy, ugly. And I'll tell you to reference another painting that I'm crazy about, who died in 2018, Malcolm Morley. So a painter that is so unique and definitely guided by no one rudder.
And also bucked the trends.
Always, willing to do that, and made some very muddy paintings. Some very brown, just sort of mixed, mushy paintings that somehow I'm still like there with it.
I'm so quoting that, mixed mushy paintings.
They are mixed and mushy paintings, and there's so it's like the same thing with music. Like if you're going to do this, like if you're going to step out there and you're going to forget some words, or you're going to hit some bad notes, or you're going to trip on stage, or you're going to show up with low energy, which is just going to happen. It's like knowing that's part of me being a human. This is all part of me being a human. Part of all of us being a human at this moment.
So you've referenced a few painters, kind of contemporary painters who, by the way, in case you can't tell, this is the series that's up that are the kind of cut out canvases where there's no background. But kind of reflecting on some of the earlier paintings that you showed, the motherhood and fatherhood especially, it seems like you're pulling forward a lot of like historical references, old master paintings, religious paintings from like 16th, 17th century. Like, so you've referenced some contemporary artists that you've been in active conversation with. Can you talk about going that far back in history and how that happened? What was alluring about those works?
Yeah, so on the way back, the first things I was responding, this doesn't go that far back yet, but I'll step back, I'll make it kind of swiftly. When I was in art school, I was really drawn to Alice Neal and Degas. I know they're different times completely, but that was happening for me, just for my sensibility and what I was drawn to for line quality and whatnot. In that late 1800s period where you get into Courbet and you start looking at his champion, like the way that he was kind of like morally aware. It was unpopular then to paint paintings of deer in the woods, just like it could be now in certain circles. I love that. I love that he gave his all to this scattered, countryside forest painting. He just went all in.
Yes, and he also painted everyday people.
Everyday people and glorified them. And then you go on back to where you see where Caravaggio was using, people that were living very questionable lives in his religious paintings to model. That was the ultimate for me. Was Caravaggio. And so I would fancy myself during a lot of these earlier than that. That
feels like an Alice Neal.
Yeah, that's much more Alice Neal vibe, for sure. Because everything she painted was in a chair.
Yes, exactly. And it was people not necessarily smiling, but these are real emotions and real feelings, and it may not be uplifting, but man, is it human.
No, it's so human. And her drawing and her painting was so human. Sometimes you show somebody a painting of hers, say, look how amazing this is. Sometimes they're like, it's amazing.
It's amazing. It may be a little bit hard. This work, I know we're getting sidetracked, but this is just, there's so many emotions on the faces of these children that, and their body language and the way that the chair both kind of consumes them and supports them.
Yeah, and that painting is at the actual painting.
Plug it in.
Yeah, well, no, but so I would fancy myself with those paintings like the motherhood and fatherhood, thinking about the contemporary light in paintings that what Thibault was making, and then the chiaroscuro approach of Caravaggio, and thinking to myself, how can I match those together? So I would sometimes think in my mind, a band of all bands, like Blind Melon to me was a band that would sound, at first listen, it was like, oh, this is a nice little Americana tune, and then you think, wait, this song is about something really pretty wretched, and I loved that dichotomy. So that was something that I thought a lot about in that chiaroscuro approach to the figure with a very light background.
Well, the early works, which were on view when the slideshow first started, they really have this sense of like the figure kind of coming out into the light. Like the background is so shaded and darkened. It feels very spiritual. So it's clearly there were some formal choices. Were there any other, from a subject matter or a emotional or psychological standpoint, the choice to kind of take these, yourself, your family members, and friends, and depict them in this way where they're so endowed with this, kind of spiritual and mystical kind of qualities?
Well, I think the ultimate element that would drive this conversation would be the darkness in the paintings, which is what we can talk about as far as mystical and unknown. And for sure, the dark and the unknown is such a major part. The doubt of what's going to happen to me, what is happening to me, what's going to happen to you. Going back to functional, practical thinking about this, studio choices, daily choices. Did I stay up all night painting versus did I sleep and work 9 to 5? You know, those are major contributors here. And when I got married in 2003, my wife and I moved to Mars Hill, North Carolina, outside of Asheville. It was way up in the mountains, and it was a quiet little town. And it was this little ranch house. She was working as a nurse because the day job wasn't doing great at the time. And I would paint, she would work the late shift. So I would work on her schedule. So just simply because of that, I would work in the dark. And for 2 years, in an intense way, I was really, like right out of school, I took 8 months after I thought, I'm gonna be a musician, I'm not gonna mess with this. I didn't paint for 8 months, and that's the longest I've gone in my life, not painting. And then I returned to it in that darkness. And that was the lift off that went to the next studio that I painted a lot of the big ones leading into the thing. But just a practical thing of painting in the dark.
Isn't that fascinating? I mean, it's like these, not that they're small choices, but they're not like glamorous choices, right? Like it's just the reality of how your life was unfolding at
100%.
that time that determined what would become, which now as an art historian and a curator, and certainly as just a viewer, you kind of bring additional layers of interpretation around, you know, whether these are, you know, modern day saints, modern day heroes, or tragic figures. I mean, there's a lot that can be interpreted from, especially from those kind of earlier, as you would say, darker paintings. But it's really kind of delightful to hear about the practical concerns that birthed them.
Yeah, and when they, like you said, the choice, they weren't choices really.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it was
the reality.
It was how we were surviving our lives.
Sure.
And
Yes.
Yeah, it's bizarre. So I think if you fast forward to now, when I'm thinking about studio, this is with music too. I'm thinking more like, how do I get that out of my off my table where I think or pretend that I'm controlling it, and try to get to where face the fact that it's happening to me, and that if I've been sort of come up with this harebrained idea to paint this thing that's going to be either off-putting or really underwhelming once again, just do it, because maybe you don't know, maybe you just don't know.
And to what extent is that similar to how you create music and how you prepare, like your musical kind of practice? How do they relate?
Well, we were talking backstage, we were talking about, this is funny, we were talking about how being safe to fail and how good failure is, and I was like, well, this is great, we're showing up, we're like-minded here, we're all speaking from a place of failure in certain ways, but something that Nora was pointing out was they at the museum provide for artists by basically granting them money to make work, and it provides them a safe space to make mistakes, because the work, I'm making this up, the work's paid for, so they can now work. So it provides them space. In the world of music or making songs, we hustled for that very early, like we just tooth and nail fought for a moment to write, and we latched on to songs and we would memorize them, we would do whatever we had to. When Seth and Bob and I were getting going in 2002, and when Seth and I were doing it in 2098, it was so different than that. So very different than that. So you documented things in different ways that were not quite as quick and dependable. So it was a whole different relationship. When we met Rick Rubin, our number one reason for working with Rick in 2008, when we first worked with him, was creatively we knew that there would be an expansion. We never knew we would once again. It's similar to the Eric situation. We didn't realize that we were becoming friends. Like we were loving someone.
And trusting.
We were building a relationship with a human. But what Rick provided for us, like Nora says he provided us a way to look at it and go, there's no deadline here, there's no budget here. Stop thinking about that. And that sounded crazy to us because we were used to 13 days, 10 to 13 days was our top amount of time to make a record. And then we were back out. Like Emotionalism was made tops in 2 weeks. Like that's it, we were done and we were moving on. And special things happened in that space. Like it's a good way to work, it's not a bad way to work. The limitation, and I apply it in work now in painting, in the way that I make a grid and commit to it, and I'm obedient to it. So now I see the value in it, which is why if you hear a song like Cheap Coffee and you're talking about, oh, okay, I see how 800 square feet is good, and how 5,000 square feet can be quite a distraction.
Oh yeah.
So you see that, and just all I can hope for is to be transformed and be able to observe that and just learn whatever I learned from it. But what Rick, when he provided that for us, it changed our relationship with making songs, and that we now listened more. We listened more to our work. And the bigger thing in that, and the next thing up was, we took some ownership away from individuals, like it said. We put our individual hat in the back, on the floor, and said we're together here.
Yeah.
If we could do anything, if the Avett brothers or any group or any museum or any, this is different for an isolated, like an individual that's painting, it's a little different. But when we're in a community, if we can look at it like a team and say, you know, I mean, there's no problem for a basketball player to say, man, I got the most assists tonight, it's great. But when you're like being like young and trying to be a star, it's kind of tough to be the assist guy. You want to be
the star.
You want to be the slam dunker. And it is. And so Rick helped us look at that in the big leagues. We're not making anything great if we're always concerned about what it's going to look just like you thought it was going to look, because it's going to look better than that with all of our communal involvement.
Well, and he himself is such a proponent of, I don't want to hear the same thing. I want to hear something that's awful, but I want to, if it's different, that's exciting. And there's new potential there.
When we shared with him, I was sharing with him the last Gleam record we put out, and this is to speak to that, just to let him listen, because we made that one more or less on our own. And he said, I believe the guys that are singing this. So to him, I think for Rick, and Rick could correct me if I was wrong, but I think Rick needs to believe that you are who you are.
You are, yes.
And if you're not, you can kind of, and he might be wrong. You know, all of us might get it wrong sometimes. You might say, oh, it might very well be that person. You really don't, you can't really make that call except for yourself.
But I think it resonates with what Eric Fisher was saying to you in the studio, of like, that's Wayne Tebow, that's not, you know,
that's right, 100%.
What is you? And, you know, and then you went in different directions, which is really cool, but because you took it upon yourself to explore that.
Yeah.
Rather than say, or rather than be stuck by it. It became a jumping off point.
Well, you know what's nice about that story is I think I made the part up about him saying that about Wayne Tebow. But it sounds
we have
like
all digested it.
I mean, he implied it either way. There's a difference between truth and facts.
We get the spirit of the conversation.
I mean, he might have said that.
In art history, there's so much interpretation, so we just talk about the spirit.
Is Dolph here? Our manager? He did write it down. There was one time somebody said something like, Willie Nelson said the Avett brothers are the best, the best brother act in the world or something. And I said, did he really say that? He said, well, we can't prove that he did. So that's a little winded there. Let's go.
I don't think anyone in this room would challenge that.
No, they should. The best brother act is probably way unknown. We just don't know him yet.
You're very humble. I have a question about some of, as people have been seeing throughout the slideshow, there's certain images that you seem to have kind of engaged with and interrogated quite a lot over time. A particular image of, I believe it's your wife, sitting down with her leg crossed, that recurs in a number of works, type of works, painting, print. Can you just talk about what are you attracted to in the images that you that recur throughout your painting and printing? what are you hooked on, kind of, with those?
Yeah. If I answer that, like I have a tendency to answer it, and I might could come up with a clever answer. It could sound good. It might be because that was the only screen that I had at the time. It really could. I mean, we all think that's it. It's a very practical thing. But when I do look at that in hindsight, or if I'm looking at other artists that I've seen, Malcolm Morley's a good example, where I see this recurring thing, or in music where you hear the same thing, you go, of course you do. We quote the same things all the time, and so that's for either a practical reason, like it's the only image you have to work from, or you're just downright obsessed with it. I don't know if it's in this slideshow, I think it might be. There's these little 8x10 paintings. And my goal when I was a graduate, I made a proclamation to my, if that's the word, I claimed that I was going to do a gallery full of these 8x10s, all around the whole thing, ceiling to floor to ceiling. It was an idea that never could be. I ended up selling the pieces for $80 a piece, so I could make rent on the studio or gallery thing that I had opened up. But the first one I did was that I shared with a professor was of my wife, who how I met her was she would come and sit with me, sit for me, because I had a list where you could sign up, and I had people coming and going in my studio. I was painting them in an hour. I had 1 hour to paint. I did this one, and I showed it to my professor, Leland Wallen, who was the guy that studied under Philip Perlston, and he's a terrific painter as well. And Leland said he was concerned about me because I was starting to not finish paintings, kind of like what Eric said to me. Things were starting to be just sort of, and he was right, but I was defensive about it. And he saw this painting and he said, wait, okay, it's happening, this is it. And he would tell me all the time, he's like, I love your music, it's great, but you were born to do this, you gotta quit the music stuff. You were born to paint, period. He said, you moved to New York City when you're done with school. And he said, don't get a teaching job. He said, don't get a waiter, like don't get another job unless you have to, and don't, he said, stay there for 3 years. He said, a year minimum, but you need to really try for 3 years.
Wow.
And I just took all that. I thought that was very flattering, but once again, the day job was wrong. I did this painting, I showed it to Leland, he said, now you're in, you got it. And I said, he said, this is it, this is what I'm talking about. And I said, well, I think I'm in love with this person. I think I'm gonna ask her to marry me. And he was like, oh God. the first year with it, he was like, oh my God, you're very naturally talented, you should do this. And I wasn't the only person, like there were a lot of talented painters. That's great. And there were some really brilliant men. But he saw me sort of slide, and then as I came back, he's like, oh, he's back. And then he's like, oh God. The point in telling you that is to be obsessed with an image of your wife, to paint things that you love or are in love with. I think that's probably a good idea.
Well,
I don't think everybody does.
I don't think everyone. I think frankly a lot of people don't always do it. They often want to have some distance between their life, their world, and what they're working on. I mean, they want to. That doesn't mean they always do.
That's exactly right.
But I think, especially with the series that we're seeing right now, these paintings are so intimate. I mean, it feels like we're at the table with, I'm assuming that's one of your children, but okay. It feels like we're in the kind of somewhat chaotic, especially with young children, family life, just everyone moving around and things happening, and you're stealing these moments of activity. You're kind of preserving them, holding them on the canvas forever, like a photograph maybe, or a personal memory. But it feels to me very brave to share such intimacy, such personal intimacy with the world. Was that hard for you at all? Is it hard for you? Do you think about it that way?
I think not so much. I think if I was going to put something out there, I could tell, I won't tell you, but I could tell you ideas that I've had for paintings that would be extremely revealing about the more despicable things about me. You know what I mean? Like all of us have these.
Sure.
It's okay. It's all right. But then I ask myself, what is that? What is that model? I'm not talking about model like a magazine or anything. I'm saying, what does it show? What does it share? What does it construct? And I do think that there's sometimes one step back, two steps forward for what I put out there. But I guess what I'm getting at is that I curate all this stuff. I do believe that I find moments where like there's a runner high, out of control sort of thing. But what's going to be on the canvas has already been decided.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So to just do it, I don't know. I think it might be brave. But I think it's brave for us to walk down the street, to wake up, and just, this is crazy. Like we have to get out of this life. You know what I mean? Like we have to go through this life, and that's just to get up and do it is super crazy. It's brave just to do it, and that relationship. I don't know. I heard Bob Dylan say one time, it's not brave like going to war. You know?
Well, I think there's just different sets of concerns.
For sure, yeah.
And I think that in terms of, yes, we live in a world where many people don't distinguish between, the world that they live online and the world that they live in person. There's no disconnect. It's all one and the same, and people are very comfortable bearing everything, personal, private, what have you.
Yeah.
So I know that we live in that culture. On the other hand, we also live in a culture that is about putting a certain idea of ourselves forward in many ways. And so to show the realness, and the, again, I would say intimacy of, a life that is very relatable, that it's not, these aren't moments of glamour or fashion. They're really honest, or they feel at least very honest portrayals of everyday life, which certainly connects with some of the artists that you mentioned earlier. But I guess my point to you is like, do you see it in that way, or do you just see it as like, this was already kind of like planned out for me and I'm kind of following on that path?
You and I were talking about on the phone some of this stuff, and it reminded me of what I was telling you about the newer work, which we really haven't seen any of it on this slideshow, which is totally okay.
It's good, man.
Yeah, it's fun. There used to be, I think some of this work is very centered, obviously like a nude self-portrait is very centered on me, very centered on the artist really within themselves. As the idea of self changes and dissipates, disappears, dissolves, whatever it is, or transforms or changes or hightails it out, is more like it. Now there's more of the hand is a little more, there's a little more of a disappearance of the artist. And the evidence of me in the work is going to be more in maybe how that burnt umber made its way across the cobalt wood and mixed with it, and less, especially as my children grow, and that life changes. There's even another shift of like, well, what are you looking at? What are you looking at? And maybe it's going to be deers, bass. It may be, but that's really not the point. In a weird way, I'm kind of like, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We're going to talk about, we'll talk about what's it about, and I'm like with David Sal, I like how David Sal said, artists are talking to artists, which once again, creators are talking to creators, which we want to know about, well, how? How did you do that? Not so much, what does it mean?
Yeah.
More like, how did that happen?
Well, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received was in graduate school when a professor shared, the artist's opinion is but one opinion on the work of art. And I was like, oh wow, that just opened things up so much. But I think we now live in a world where the artist's voice has been centered so much, and so it's like it starts with what the artist thinks, and then kind of interpretation sometimes can radiate out from that. But it's really interesting to hear your point, which is it's not about what I think. I'm just kind of putting these things together, these different pieces. I'm speaking metaphorically, but putting these pieces together, and how those pieces, relate to one another is kind of seems like what you're most curious about.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Also, my way of saying that would be, I'm a little less, it's not so much about me doing it, it's now about it happening to me. And there being some sort of evidence that it happened to me. And what happened to me later, I think it'll be understood by me or you or anybody. Or not.
And you're okay with that too?
I gotta be. I have to.
Have you always been?
No. No. I mean, it's been all about me. All about me. I mean, so for the music people here, like Salvation song, like that's the inception of that song, the beginning of that song. I'm telling you, like that song happened to me, and it was I was trying to serve it for self-serving. Like I was hearing, going, oh, this sounds great. This sounds so humble. It rolled over and rolled over and rolled over, and it showed me what it means to actually be that, like to live in that with people. You can't live with that on your own. You can't live in humility on your own. And so then you can sing it and believe it too. Authentically. And I don't know that I could early on, but then you just look back and go, well, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if it was self-serving to you because it was happening to you. There was something else happening there. It wasn't. You were just a pen.
Right. Like the vessel.
Yep.
All right, I have one more question and then we're going to open it up to the audience. But I am just curious, for those who are artists in the audience, what advice would you offer to them as a creative, as people are starting or deep in their own creative practice? What would you share with them?
Well, it wouldn't be, I don't know what the detail would be, but I would say pay attention to practical needs. Don't go hungry if you don't have to. Like if you have a snack, eat it. If you're hungry, eat the snack. Seriously. And you will position yourself in a way that you can follow that discipline. And then beyond that, just commit to it and be willing to, like, literally be okay to die for it. Be okay to die for it. So those biggest fears that everybody's got, one of them or two of them or 10 of them, those biggest ones can really be set aside when you have purpose driven. An example of that would be maybe you're terrified of one part of town, but there's a painting by Alice Neal that's being shown here. Don't not go see that painting because that's a scary part of town. Go to the painting, and maybe you can get a coffee while you're there. You don't have to do that. Don't be hard on yourself.
Get a snack.
Yeah, but if you need it, but don't be hard on yourself. At least go see the painting. Don't not see the painting. But that's it. But my main one would be eat. Don't go hungry if you don't have to.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, take note of that. Don't go hungry.
So I play soccer with the boys and my daughter. I coached my daughter's middle school soccer team for the past 2 years. Not this year, but the younger boys. Some of them, when they're still at an age where they'll be kind of dramatic.
No.
Yeah, right. One of them, I figured this thing out. I was like, don't fall down unless you have to. I realized these kids would they would flail. I was like, wait, you didn't get knocked, baby. Don't. So that was one of our big things. Like, nobody falls down unless they have to.
That's amazing. It reminds me of this Christian Barkley video. It's a 3-channel video. It's called Who's the Dame? And it's just clips of him, this famous soccer player. And it's all the times that he fell, but like faking it, And it's like, and it's brilliant. And it just speaks to the dramatization in professional sports.
But they don't realize it's a tool yet. They're doing it just for the fun of the drama. We're just trying to break them up early. Later they can use it as a tool. I'm all for that. I'm for the flop. Let's do that. Unnecessary drama.
All right, so Scott, we invited audience members to submit questions. We have time for a few of them. I am going to read them, and then we'll go from there. All right. And I don't have my reading glasses on, so forgive that I have to hold this like 10 feet away. Okay. have you ever destroyed a finished piece of your work? What changed about your perception of it and why?
Okay. Yeah, I have. It was formally a pretty good painting. I was kind of obsessed with the painter Otto at the time.
Oh.
I was interested in his, he's a really amazing painter.
Totally.
But it was a painting of, we have some photographer friends at the time, they were married, Mike and Lindsay, and I would get them to model for me, and we would do these multiple figure paintings. And in the painting, I was decapitated and nude. And I was looking at going, this is really rough.
What year was this?
2010 or 11. It was formally it was a great painting, but it was just so negative. It was dark, and I was like, this is not necessary. Because I love the Caravaggio, like the David Goliath painting. Like there's some of the Falcone's paintings that they're incredible. So I was just discovering this, like look at this, figuring out. It was just it didn't need to exist. There's been, for the most part though, these are going to be paintings that then they would be finished, considered finished, but they end up just being practices. They don't formally really. I can see if I can dress them down, I know Eric Fisher would he would be like, don't bring me this.
So did you destroy it, or did you?
I destroyed it. I put it in a dumpster. I think with a handful of them. That's common practice, I think, because a lot of like in between paintings, they become that. They're just keeping the motion working, and they're not all necessarily worth sharing from my perspective. And I'm the only one that can really discriminate there, and judge that.
Yes.
So the book "What Is Art" by Leo Tolstoy affected me quite a great deal. And I still have questions and thoughts about it, but it really pushes. And I was asking Seth this because something I'm writing right now. Yesterday we were both talking. I said, can beauty be destructive? And instantly I was like, oh, wait a second, a tornado. And I said, no, a tornado is not beautiful. It's awesome. There's big storms and there's really wretched things that happen. Someone could say these are awesomely wretched.
Right.
But are they beautiful? And can destructive imagery be beautiful? Can beautiful imagery be destructive?
Well, it's kind of like the sublime, right? Like where beauty is like something so saturated in beauty that it feels not of this world.
Sure. We'd have to agree what beauty is if we went that way.
That's true.
And so like if we say, we're talking about beauty as far as Da Vinci, the coding of what a beautiful man or woman is, that's one thing, but it's not exactly that. We don't really have the capability of formulating, equating. I know we don't.
Well, and there's beauty found in the world. There's beauty that's created for us.
Absolutely.
Yes, to your point, it'd be very hard to like.
But is it ever destructive? I don't know. It's just a question, and I don't have an answer for that. I just was wondering. So, but in Leo Tolstoy's "What Is Art," he really pushes this idea that can anything that really causes negativity is not the right word. Tension. Tension's not the right word. Conflict or pain.
Yeah.
He's saying, can it be art? He uses the ballet or opera as he brings that up and says, do you know how many people's lives are in conflict or in disarray from this industry? So what does that mean?
Right.
I don't know. What does it mean? I don't know. That's going off the deep end. But so judging work that might be like that, for example, that one that had the really rough imagery. So.
All right, here's the next one. What aspect of the human experience inspires you the most?
What was that? Say that first part again. What
aspect of the human experience inspires you the most?
How do I say it? Like everybody knows when they forget about themselves and they aren't posturing anymore, which we do in little micro posturings, and then we do in macro or major posturing, like being on stage at Red Rocks or something. So there's like the whole gamut. But when we forget, like that posturing disappears when you're actually doing your job on the stage at Red Rocks. You're not up there going, like, so when that happens in somebody that I love and they're not aware of themselves anymore, I don't know what that's called.
Is it like authenticity or being true to yourself?
It is both those things. It is both those things. And it's a lack of control. It's a loss of control. It's a loss of grip. And it happens, like I said, it happens a lot when we eat. That's why eating with each other is vulnerable and sweet. You hope it happens with you when you meet with people. Sometimes it doesn't. You'd really, like, in this sort of scenario, I'm always hoping it happens in this sort of scenario, because I can't really, for you and I, we know each other now, but in some of these folks I know, but you just hope it happens in a real way, that we're not thinking anymore about what we're saying what we believe, what we feel. So I like when I see that.
That kind of directness, like
It's
unfiltered.
Yeah, it's definitely direct.
Okay, the next one. What is the process you go through during brainstorming new projects or artworks? Sorry, what is the process you go through during brainstorming? Why am I struggling? New projects and artworks. Do you know instantly what you want to do, or does the idea take time and molding?
It's both. That it happens both in many ways. As of now, I have 2 or 3 works. 2 or 3 pieces in the works, and one is gridded out. I know exactly what I'm doing when I get back to the studio. I'll know what I'm doing with it. I'll know how many times or how many days it'll take to do it, how many hours. Beside it is one that is just a mess that was changed quite a bit, and I don't know where it will go. Or maybe it may be in the dumpster. But
careful, you're gonna have dumpster
but
right?
well, my dad is the master at yard fires. So it's different. But as far as brainstorming is concerned, what I'm always hoping is that the images find me, and that I'm hoping that whenever, like, if I'm using imagery from a phone or an iPad, like, I'm hoping that I shot that without knowing what I was shooting it for. That's what I try to look for that. So I hope that the primary reason for shooting something is not, hey, I want to get this painting. After I've maybe decided what I'm going to do and I need to readjust, I might go back and do something, but it's pretty rare.
All right, this is going to be our last question.
Oh.
Sorry. As a high school art teacher and working with young artists, what do you wish you knew at that age that could have helped or altered the course of your career?
Okay, well, I guess we're talking 8, like high school down, sort of. It sounds like such an easy question. I guess a surprise to me has been how unromantic being an artist can be. That'd be good to know. That'd be good to know that art can be, the practice of making something is no different than the practice of like really learning how to dribble a soccer ball or how to swing a hammer. If you can kind of give yourself to that, that's like some secret knowledge, I think. Because instead we look at it like this thing that everybody knows, or it seems like everybody talks about it a lot, that at this point in age, kids sort of they start judging their work, and some of them retreat, and some of them lean in, some of them don't as much. I can see it in my 3 kids. A couple of them judge their work much more than one of them. Both of them can be good and bad the way you do it. But if I had known that, hey, look, this is really just a matter of putting talent into it. It's really just a matter of doing it. I would have saved a lot of wasted time. A lot.
But was it, in retrospect?
No, it wasn't. It was exactly how it was supposed to be. I mean, I was destined to waste time. And I look forward to doing that some more. That's a nice place to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, because I think, sometimes we get into, like, those of us with more linear kind of brains think that, like, everything has to lead to something else. And I think the creative mindset is like openness and curiosity, and things are happening maybe for a reason, but maybe not, or maybe it's for reasons we don't know at this time.
Yeah, you gotta feel safe. You gotta feel safe. Like, it's important to feel safe. That's maybe one of the secret knowledge things. Like, if you don't feel safe, you can't really sing. You can't really paint if you're not feeling safe.
Yeah,
You can't
perform.
really do anything.
Yeah.
So that's important. And I think it's key. Like, and I bet some people out here are pretty familiar with this too, or seeing this in their lives, or have seen it in others' lives maybe. Like riding a motorcycle, or like kicking a ball, or shooting hoops, or painting. Like, we're so quick to professionalize or institutionalize it for ourselves, to make it something that we're going after.
Right.
And I would say just to hell with that, like really. And then you actually will. You probably have a better chance of professionalizing or institutionalizing.
When you're not seeking the thing that you're.
Once a person sees that being a rock star is a joke, then they actually really become a rock star. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
I feel like this is a very meta moment.
It's really silly. Maybe that's just like, maybe everybody knows that now, but to live, it's not so easy. It's not so easy.
Yeah.
It feels critical. And look, when you're younger, you're like, oh my God, how am I going to paint if I don't paint well?
Mm-hmm.
And if my mom's telling me that it's great or bad or whatever, or so-and-so, little Johnny over there is telling me I suck or whatever, like, what do you do? How do you protect yourself from that? That's the key. And I think if you just get blinders on and do it a lot, you'll hear it.
And it sounds like also like be in conversation and be in a community.
Oh, 100%.
Or even ideally a team, like what you're talking about with music. Like,
Yeah.
so that, because I think there's this very common misconception about artists being like toiling away in the studio alone, completely unaware of what's going on around them, or uninformed by experiences that they've had. And that's just, I've never met an artist where that's actually the case.
That's the problem.
Right. It's like we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and we are imprinted on by those who we are surrounded by.
For sure. People that we really don't like, pretty despicable people too. And Caravaggio killed somebody.
Yeah, he's not a good guy.
He hasn't been canceled. He killed somebody. I'm not going to say anything else.
And ran away.
And ran away.
Yes.
He did a lot of things.
He did a lot of
very
things.
nice.
Yes.
And and we're part of that.
Yeah.
We're all part of that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Calm down. But yeah, you're right, 100%. So, and I would probably have been a person that rebelled against that as a younger. I said, well, I'm going to do this one.
Right.
I am unique, and I am one of a kind. I am. But all that is so true. I had another thought, but I'm going to have to next time, I guess.
We'll do this again next week.
I so enjoy this. I'll say, last night in performing, I didn't realize this. I went into the front row and was able to sing along the line there with all the people. And it was just an amazing. It reminds me of what it means to perform and who I'm performing to and for, and really with. It's incredible. I was telling them backstage, there's a tendency to need to blur your eyes because you can get quite distracted seeing so many people with so many different reactions and beautiful faces, and et cetera. But when you're actually with people, it's really the whole point, which speaks to what you're saying. And I'm so grateful to be able to do that with people, with actual people. Another thing, lastly, I was asking Mickey Raphael from Willie Nelson's band, I said, we were playing back in 2009 or 10, we were playing a place, and Willie played the week before us, and it was like a theater, not much bigger than this one, I'd say 3 times the size. And I said, I know Willie wasn't selling big tickets, he was selling like 1,100, 800, it was small. And I said, did Willie ever get down about that? He said, Scott, Willie never knew he was playing, he never paid attention whether he was playing anybody past the first 3 rows. Because that's who whoever he could see is who he's playing for. And I was like, oh my God. nice. Yes, it's so, with all of it, it was amazing. It reminded me, and I know that I experienced the same thing, but you guys, like, he had no clue whether it was 1,100 people or 11,000, it didn't matter. He could see people.
Yeah.
So, very grateful for that.
Well, we are very grateful to you,
Thank you
for making time to share so much and be in this incredible conversation. Everyone, Scott Avett. Enjoy the rest of a beautiful weekend, and Scott, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you, Nora.